Our next storyteller is a tutor, not a student, not a learner. So she is our resident tutor storyteller, who I convinced, probably against her will, to tell the story here today. So Aline Libassi was born in New York and studied Romance languages at Queen's College and the University of Bologna. She's taught Italian, French, and Spanish in Waterbury, Torrington, and Litchfield, and English at the Scuola d'Italia in New York City. Aline is an avid cook and baker and spends part of each year at her home in Tulum, Mexico, from which she zoomed for our sessions with her learner, Bernardo, who you'll hear from in a moment. Please welcome Aline.
I'm very little, so, well, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So this is, all of these stories are about challenges, challenges that we all face in life, and this particular challenge is certainly not as arduous as the challenges that our learners have faced, but for me it was a challenge. So it's 1956, and I'm a little girl in Brooklyn, and it's Christmas morning, and I wake up, and at the end of my bed is a big box with a red ribbon. And I'm very confused because I'm Jewish, my family is Jewish, and we didn't celebrate Christmas. I open the box, and there is a Betsy Wetsy doll. Now, for those of you who are as old as I am, you will know what that doll is. That doll was a doll with curly black hair that when you fed her would pee and cry. So this was a doll that I really wanted, and I was very happy to have. But there was something odd about this. Why were they giving me a present on Christmas when I had begged for presents and never gotten one? Turned out, later on that day, that my parents tell me, we are going to Europe for 1 year. My father was an artist, and I guess they had saved up for many, many years, so he could take this year to look at all the art that he'd seen in books and paint. I don't think I really knew where Europe was. I was 8. But I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave my friends and my neighborhood and my school, but of course I had to go. So we left on a Holland American Line ship, because in those days very few people flew. You know, when you went to Europe, you took a boat. And I loved it. I was the only kid on the boat, and everybody was so nice to me. We got to London, we went to Amsterdam. My parents schlepped me to every museum and every cathedral in both countries. And my father gave me a little notebook, and he said, I want you to write down all your favorite paintings to keep me from going crazy. Finally, we arrived in Rome. And in Rome, my parents had rented an apartment. And the question was, what do they do about my schooling? So my mom was teaching me my normal subjects. She had brought books with her. But my parents wanted me to learn Italian. And somehow they had found a man who was a teacher in a local school who said he spoke English. He had been a prisoner of war of the British in the Second World War. This is only like 10 years after the end of the Second World War. So we go to school, and at that time, the boys and the girls' classes were separate, and this man, of course, taught boys. So here I was, in a boys' class, didn't speak a word of Italian. He was a disciplinarian, and when the kids didn't behave, they got whacked. You know, it wasn't like my school in Brooklyn. And so it was a very difficult time for me. He placed a book in front of me, excuse me, and I have a frog in my throat, and asked me to study. And I had no idea what he was talking about. So these days, one day after the other, but I kind of went with it, you know? I liked looking at the book, and the kids would pull my braids and call me Americana in Roman dialect. And then one day, I really had to pee. But I was afraid to go to the bathroom because it was a boys' bathroom. But I had no choice. So then I go to the bathroom, and I'm sitting there, And then I began to see all these little boys crawling under the stall, trying to get a look at me. That was it. I said to my father who came to pick me up, I don't want to go to this school anymore. Why? Well, the boys came to look under the stall and it was horrible and I hated it. So, of course, we stopped. My parents then moved to Florence because it was very cold and the apartment didn't have sufficient heating. And in Florence, they finally got the idea that I had to go to a real school, and they sent me to a private school run by a very proper lady from Boston named Miss Berry. And when we arrived at school, we had to curtsy and take this lady's hand. She probably was only 50, but in my mind she was like 150, you know? And I adored this school. And what I loved about the school the most was Italian, because I had a wonderful teacher. And I seemed easy to me. It was something that came easily to me. We spent about 6 months there. I adored it. I loved it. I loved the school. I loved my friends. And when my parents told me it was time to go back to Brooklyn, I broke down. And I said, I don't want to go back to Brooklyn. I want to stay here. And they said, listen, I'm sorry, Dad has work. That's where we live. We went back to Brooklyn. But later on, I found that I was good at languages, especially Italian. And I studied it in high school and college. And I then went to the University of Bologna, and I lived in Italy for a number of years. And that's how this tremendous passion for the country and the language started. Something that I don't think I understood when I was a little girl, but there was something in me that was ready for that experience. And I always tell my daughter, my husband, that somewhere in me is an Italian. I'm not sure with this little Jewish girl from Brooklyn, but there is an Italian in me. And before I go, I just want to thank you so much for asking me to share my story. And I also am so proud, although it's only been a year, to be part of this incredible organization that is really making such an impact on people's lives in every way in our community in the Berkshires. Thank you.